Greetings, it's Uncle Travelling Matt here and welcome to my latest vlog, which is another reading guide for a certain part of the world. And today, what I'm going to be talking about is the Eastern Balkans. Now, you may remember that quite recently I did a vlog on the Western Balkans, and that was talking about what used to be Yugoslavia and Albania. So now I'm talking about the Eastern Balkans, which is essentially Bulgaria and Romania. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, I have some reservations about actually calling Romania a Balkan country, but for the purposes of this I'm including it because a lot of the books that I'm reading do include it as a Balkan country. The notable omission there with all the Balkans is of course Greece, and I suppose also the small European part of Turkey. I do hope to do a reading guide to Greece later. But for the meantime, I'm going to be looking at Bulgaria and Romania. Now, as always, what I do is I divide the books that I'm looking at into categories. And the first one is factual books. Now, I've read quite a few factual books on Bulgaria and Romania over the years, but very few have stood out. Here are some of the ones that did, though, and foremost amongst them is this one. And this is called Beyond Hitler's Grasp, The Heroic Rescue of Bulgaria's Jews by Michael Bar Zohar. And this book tells a little known story. And when we talk about the Holocaust, and a lot of people have read or watched loads about the Holocaust, and we know names like Schindler, who rescued a lot of Jews. But actually the biggest rescuers of Jews throughout the Holocaust were the Bulgarians. And this book tells a story of how around 57,000 Jews were saved by the actions of an unlikely trio of a socialist cabinet member, well, a communist cabinet member really, the king, and the head of the Orthodox Church. You know, three men who you wouldn't normally expect to get on with each other, but they got together and they saved their country's Jews, and this is the story. And it is one of those stories where fact is more remarkable than fiction, and it's well worth reading, and it should be better known. So this is Beyond Hitler's Grasp, and the story of Bulgaria's Jews during the Holocaust. Now the next one is a book that I wanted to get for a long time. I mean, it's been out of print for years, and I'm talking about the days before the internet, where you could just, you know, search for books like that. And then I amazingly found it in a second-hand bookshop in Ho Chi Minh City, of all places. And when I opened it up, it's got this stamp, which is either Cambodian or Thai. So quite how this book ever got to Thailand, Cambodia or Vietnam, I don't know. But this book is The Apostle of Freedom by Mercia MacDermott. And it used to be, it probably isn't the case now, but it used to be that if you went to Bulgaria and you were English, then a lot of Bulgarians would say, oh yes, yeah, we have great relationships with the British, and Mercia MacDermott, oh, great lady, and she wrote a great book about Vasil Levsky, and it won a prize. I don't know if it says what the prize was. It was basically the Bulgarian Literature Prize. So, you know, I thought, well, yeah, I'd quite like to read this book. I think it's called The Golden Lion, the prize, whatever. And you know, she's Mercia MacDermott. And Mercia MacDermott was a lady, a socialist, middle-class socialist, who after World War II, went over to Bulgaria to help in a work brigade, and I think she helped build roads through the mountains, and became just a passionate advocate for Bulgaria. She was as pro-Bulgarian as Edith Durham was pro-Albanian, and she fits very much in that category of you know, eccentric English women who go to a particular country and adopt them. And she really did that with Bulgaria, and she loved Bulgaria to bits. And her gift to Bulgaria, you might say, was this book, which is An Apostle of Freedom, which was the first book in English detailing the life of Vasil Levsky, who is the national hero. And taking all that into account, I was quite excited. And I was really disappointed because for an educated woman, it's so subjective. It's not really a story of... It's a hagiography, you know. It's not really a history. It's a hagiography. It's just like, oh, how amazing Vasil Levsky is. What a great guy. And interestingly, about a year or so after I bought it, I was travelling in the north of Vietnam and I was on a trip around Halong Bay, and I met an English lady who lived in Thailand, and I was talking to her, and we got talking about Bulgaria because we both lived there, and you know, I mentioned Mercia MacDermott. I think I'd said I found this book, and she's like, oh, Mercia MacDermott, and it turns out she knew her. And I was like, oh, right, oh, you know Mercia MacDermott, do you? And she's like, yeah, yeah. And she talked about what it was. And I said, well, she was in love with Bulgaria. And she's like, well, she was in love with Vasil Levsky. She said she was like a teenager over a pop star. And you know what? That's how this book comes across. It's about a teenager talking about their pop star. But, you know, it is a work of its time, and the Bulgarians highly revere it. So, yeah, give it a read if you want. Okay, there's that one. Here's another rather left field one that somebody found it for me in, I think it's in an antiques fair. It's the Bulgarian contribution to the World Cultural Heritage, and it's basically a guide to Bulgaria's World Heritage sites. It's pretty good, you know. I mean, there's some great pictures. That's the Mother of God tomb, and it's got the Thracian tombs in there, and certain monasteries. But it really is a good intro to Bulgarian cultural history, and of course you can visit all these places. Is it published by UNESCO? I'm not quite sure, actually. No, it's published by Technica in '89, so at the very, very end of the communist era. Okay, so they're my factual books. Now I'm going to go on to travel literature, and I have to say, and you know, when I was doing my Western Balkans video, you know, I talked about how there was just so much to read. Even though I really love Bulgaria, and to be fair, Romania, there's very little to read about them, and that's such a shame, because these are two fascinating countries. And so this section ain't very big, and to be honest, it's not even that good. Okay, Travels in the Balkans by John Higgins. Now this is a classic bit of, well, 60s or early 70s, and this guy just drove across to the Balkans, and it's a pretty crap book, really. I mean, it's called Travel in the Balkans. It travels in Romania and Bulgaria. It doesn't go near Yugoslavia, let alone Albania, who would have struggled to at the time. And it's mostly travelling around Romania, but it's very dry, and it's very dull in places. But I suppose it's a timepiece, and if you know, he's very thorough, he knows his stuff, and he goes to a lot of places. I've read it twice. I read it when travelling through New Zealand in 2001, and I did reread it, or reread parts of it when I went to Romania back in about, I think it was 2012. So, yeah, I'm not really recommending that one, I'll be honest with you, but as I say, it's, you know, the problem I've got is that there aren't that many travel books. Here's another one. This is Patrick Leigh Fermor, Between the Woods and the Water. Now, Patrick Leigh Fermor is quite a well-known travel writer. He's British, and when he was about 17 or 18, no, an 18-year-old, what he did is he walked across Europe. He just set out and he walked through Holland and Germany or whatever, and he ended up, I think he ended up in Istanbul, but anyway, he ended up living in Greece, but I think his aim was Istanbul. And it was told in two books. It was told in A Time of Gifts, which goes all the way to through Germany, and then this one, Between the Woods and the Water, which talks about kind of Hungary and Romania. So it's obviously not all about the area we're talking about, but there's loads about Romania. And when he was in Romania, he kind of went off his track a bit and got really into it. This is, but it is mostly Wallachia and Transylvania, to be honest. He doesn't get into Moldavia. He is an incredible writer of prose. It's beautiful, beautiful stuff to read. It's more like reading literature than a travel book. And so, yes, I do wholeheartedly recommend this. But it is part of a whole. So it's more a journey across Europe. And of course, the third bit, which was the Greece bit, and I suppose Istanbul if you got there, and also I would imagine Bulgaria, I've not read because it wasn't released. He never finished it. That said, that there are, just trying to see if it says, oh yes, he planned a third and finished at the time of his death in 2011, which has since been edited by Colin Thurbrome and Artemis Cooper and published as The Broken Road. So maybe that will give us more for our region. But certainly, if it's half as good as this, the prose will be so beautiful that it will be worth reading. So yeah, that's Between the Woods and the Water. Okay, my next book is Balkan Ghosts, A Journey Through History by Robert D. Kaplan. And, I mean, I don't know whether to call this travel literature or factual stuff. He's a journalist who's writing about his experiences. I did mention this briefly in my Western Balkans video, but it does more accurately fit in here. Now, this book was actually very kindly bought for me by Fatma Mukhtar, who's a Balkan friend of mine, years ago. And I read it, and it really didn't do a lot for me. And you know, it was very difficult when somebody buys your book and they're like, "Oh, what did you think of it? What did you think of it?" And you can't just say, "Oh, very good, actually." But it really disappointed me, and I just put it down as to this was a writer with a lack of insight. They were very superficial, and you know, it was a disappointing thing. I also thought maybe it's because he's American and I'm British and I'm not interested in the same things as him, whatever. And so I left it, you know, and you know, that was that. But then when I went back to Romania in 2012, afterwards, for helping me to write my travel log, I reread it, either afterwards or just before. In fact, no, I reread it just before I went, I'm telling you a lie. And it blew me away because it is actually a very good book. But it's not the book that the title suggests. Now, okay, it's about all the Balkans, and that includes Greece as well, and you know, Yugoslavia. And as a book about the Balkans, it's not that good. And I think it's all about when you read something and what you're interested in at the time, because when I read it after Fatma had given it to me, I was very interested in Bulgaria. And to be honest, the Bulgarian section is poor. It's really poor. It is very superficial. He just talks to some, you know, dissidents and whatever in Sofia, and that's it. And he doesn't really get into the deeper reaches of the country at all. But you know what? The chapters on Romania are brilliant. They are absolutely brilliant. This is some of the best travel writing on Romania. And so therefore I would recommend this book for anybody going to Romania. If you're just going to Bulgaria, don't bother. The one that was my favourite was all about taking a ferry through the Danube Delta, which I've never done. I want to do, and it's purely because of that book that I want to do that. But yeah, so really, if you're going to Romania, read this. Otherwise, don't bother. Okay. While we're on travel books as well, there are a couple of others. Bill Bryson, Neither Here Nor There, which I've got a copy and I can't find anywhere. That was the first bit of writing I ever read on Bulgaria. And it's a very eclectic book travelling all around Europe. But there is one chapter where he goes to Sofia, and it's brilliantly written. And I remember he's just blown away by how good looking the girls are, which made me want to go to Sofia. When I went to Sofia, I was actually a bit disappointed because it's not that great a place. But yeah, it's a great little timepiece for when he went. It's obviously early 90s. And it's a well-written chapter. I mean, Bill Bryson's always written well, but a well-written chapter. And then the other one, which I borrowed from the library, and it is one of the best. Well, I say it's not a travel book really. It's more a memoir. It's a book called Along the Enchanted Way by William Blacker. And William Blacker is one of those English eccentrics. So, unlike Mercia MacDermott, he's a male English eccentric. And he went over to, he was quite into Tolstoy. He went over to Maramuresh, which is the least developed region of Romania. It's in the north. And loved how it was an almost medieval landscape in the countryside there. And so decided to set himself up as a peasant farmer, and he bought a scythe and he started scything fields, and then he met a Roma girl and got together with her for a while, and I think he got together with his sister for a while. I mean, you could say he really got to know the local culture very well. But it's this beautiful account of him living in this impoverished, isolated community in northern Romania. Brilliant book. And while we're on the kind of memoirs theme, there is also A Street Without a Name by Kapka Kassabova, and she's Bulgarian and she's writing about her childhood in Bulgaria. I think it's Plovdiv. I'll be honest, I read that book and it was good, but I expected better. And I know, I just remember she was growing up in one of those big like tower blocks that, you know, anyone who's been to Bulgaria will recognise. And, you know, she was very negative about the socialist regime, as most people were at that time. And I remember the one bit that stands out for me with that is she said that she saw a poster one day and it said, "Let's build socialism with a human face." And then she wondered, well, why should socialism have a human face? And why should we try? Why doesn't it just have that naturally? So what's socialism without a human face? And yeah, that bit stuck in my mind. It was a good book, and if you're into Bulgaria, I'd read it, but it wasn't that good. Thought it could have been better. And while we're kind of on that subject of memoirs and travel, and this is one of those books that you really cannot categorise. And this is Bulgarian Voices by Philip Ward. Now, I have also read Bulgaria Travel Guide by Philip Ward. And Philip Ward's an Englishman. He's very academic, and he wrote this travel log in the late 80s, so it was before the fall of the wall. Very detailed, very descriptive, very dry and very dull, if I'm honest. You know, even a Bulgaria-phile like me struggled to get through that one. But yeah, it is what it is. But this one was not much better. And what he does, it's him interviewing just people in Bulgaria. And I think there's about, I don't know how many there is. There's about 40 odd people that he's interviewed. So here we are, you know, we have Elena Ilieva Chovanova, Romani cleaner. So, you know, he's interviewing cleaners, he's interviewing students, he's interviewing former political prisoners, scientists, whatever. You know, a real cross-section of Bulgarian society just after the fall of the regime. And, it's very interesting, actually. Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, he actually also, including in there, is the president and the king. And then, you know, right down to, like I say, cleaners and kids and stuff like that. The one that stuck in my mind is there was a fish farmer he interviewed who was saying that really we need to get people eating more fish because Bulgarians aren't into fish particularly. And, you know, until then I thought, yeah, the Bulgarians don't really eat a lot of fish, do they? And it never struck me. But yeah, so that's that one's quite good. Better than his travel log. Finally, I've got the travel books that I've bought for going to Bulgaria. I initially bought this one because it was the only one, and this is Lonely Planets, Eastern Europe on a Shoestring people who've seen my guides to travel guides before know what I think about Lonely Planet. And one of the faults is that, you know, they often try to cover too much in one book. This one certainly does. It covers about 10 countries, including Poland and, you know, Czech Republic and all that. But you know what? They were the first to do it. Nobody else was doing it at the time. So it's quite good in that respect. Then I have 2 editions of the Rough Guide to Bulgaria, because Rough Guide did a guide to Bulgaria before anybody else did. People will know that I've struggled with rough guides in the past because there's really dense text and really bad maps, as that page shows. And so I still struggle with rough guides. I did have a Lonely Planet Bulgarian, which was okay, though by Lonely Planet standards it wasn't that good. And I do believe that Brad now do Bulgaria guides, so I think I might be publishing one of those in the near future. Finally, I normally do a section on literature, like novels about certain countries. And I have read a couple of Romanian novels, but there was nothing that really stood out as being great. And buying anything by Bulgarian authors is just really hard. And the only ones that stood out for me was... when I was at Leeds University, the Slavic Studies department, they had a collection of stories by Jordan Yovkov, who was a native Dobrich, called Hot Noon, which was quite good, and I quite enjoyed that. And then there was just a collection by Bulgarian writers, and I remember there was a very good story about a train that comes to stop in a station in the middle of nowhere. And I can't remember whether that was in the Yovkov one or that was in the general collection. But you know, that story kind of hit home. And then I have a Nikolai Haitov collection called Wild Tales, or Devirazkasi is the Bulgarian. And that was quite nice. And I actually managed to buy that off the author because it was out of print and he had a few copies left and he said send me a tenner, which was very kind of him. Well, in fact, not the author, the translator, who was one of the professors at Leeds. But what I'm trying to get at there is there's not really a lot of use in me reviewing or recommending any of these because you can't get hold of them. And that's a big shame. And I hope, you know, as more and more British people move to Bulgaria or go on holiday there, then we will get more Bulgarian literature that we can read. But there isn't a lot I can recommend. And the same goes with the Romanians, to be honest. There's a little bit more there, but not much. Anyway, that is my guide to stuff to read on the Eastern Balkans. It is shorter than the Western Balkans, not because I have any less passion for the area, but because really the quality and the quantity of the stuff ain't there. But don't let that put you off from going, because it is one of my favourite areas of the world. It's just a tapestry of delights. It really is. So please, get yourself on a plane to either Romania or Bulgaria, or if you've got time, both. You will enjoy it. It's incredible. Thanks for watching and keep travelling.